There are a number of theories as to how a person becomes a ghost after their death. They may have suffered a violent or traumatic death, any type of a sudden death. And the theory is it causes the spirit of the person confusion. They don't know if they're dead. Many of them think that they're still living, and for some reason, no one can communicate with them. No one can acknowledge their presence. That's one theory. Another popular theory is prior to death, the individual had some major unresolved business. And so now they can't rest easy. Well, I have my own theory. I truly believe an individual becomes a ghost because for whatever reasons, they just don't want to move forward in their spiritual journey. They want to remain right where they're at. I've always believed that, and now I have evidence to provide to you that proves that that theory is true. So here we go with today's true tale of the paranormal, which centers around a tenant my parents had for over 40 years, and his name was Arnold. Now, as I've mentioned on my channel before, I lived in literally a 4-story house. We had the first floor where my parents and I lived. We had second floor that was split into 2 small apartments. When I was little, my grandpa lived in one, and our tenant, Mr. Arnold, lived in the other. And then we had a full length and width of the house attic on the 4th floor, and the bottom floor was a full-size basement. I'm not sure when Mr. Arnold moved into his apartment up there, because I always remember seeing him around the property from when I was teeny tiny. So I'm figuring he had to move in when I was at least, earliest memory of him in our yard or pulling in after work, I was about 4. So he was very quiet. He worked for a utility company, and every day he'd go off to work. Every evening he'd come home from work. He did not seem to have any type of a social life. And I only saw evidence of him having a visitor once. And I'll never forget it. I was 8. And my friend Jimmy and I were outside playing, and we were running up and down our driveway. The entrance to the 2 small apartments upstairs, they had their own separate entrance at the end of the driveway and their own stairwell to go up to their apartments. And I saw Mr. Arnold come out. Then I saw him come out a second time. And my little brain was just like, wait, what? I saw 2 Mr. Arnolds dressed slightly differently. And then my friend Jimmy starts screaming. He runs down the rest of the length of our driveway, which back then was completely open in the back. And it opened up onto Jimmy's parents' property. So he could run from my driveway into his driveway and directly into his front door. It was a strange little setup there. And that's what he did, screaming all the way. Meanwhile, that scared me. I start screaming, and I run into our side door of my house, which was right in front of me, as luck would have it. Run in there, I'm screaming and yelling at my mom and saying, there's 2 of them, there's 2 of them. And she's like, there's 2 what? There's 2 what? And I'm like, there's 2 Mr. Arnolds. And she's like, wait, what? 2 Mr. Arnolds? I could literally see the light bulb turn on behind her eyes. And she goes, oh no, that's okay, sweetie. Mr. Arnold has an identical twin brother. He must be visiting. And I'm like, oh, wow. That explained the 2 Mr. Arnolds, right? So, of course, I felt somewhat foolish, and, we all just laughed it off and totally forgot about it. Now, Mr. Arnold was always really quiet. He'd come home after work, and he'd be up there, and we could kind of hear him moving around a little bit. We never heard a loud TV. We never heard any loud noises come from him. So he was just always there. He was always a fixture. He was a really nice, quiet man. Whenever anything went wrong around the property, he'd help my dad fix it. He was very handy with everything. And so he was, a great asset, really. And he was like the perfect tenant. He was quiet. He never had any parties or allowed visitors. And he always paid the rent on time. So the years go on. I go off to college. Mr. Arnold is still living in his apartment. And in the meantime, the other apartment, after my grandpa retired to San Antonio, Texas, when I was about 10, the other apartment had a rotating door of tenants, constantly moving in, constantly moving out, and I always knew why. It was because of what my friend Jimmy and I saw in that upstairs apartment, and then what happened years later that caused that vision to almost become a reality, but not quite. If you want to hear about that, check out this story here after you're done with this video, and I will link it below also. So, Mr. Arnold, still a tenant, still super quiet, extremely helpful, nice, friendly, quiet and shy, you know. Well, he would get, packages once in a while, and the mailman knew that Mr. Arnold lived directly upstairs from us. And the mailman always brought Mr. Arnold's packages to that back stairwell. He wouldn't leave them out in front of the house. Just our packages would be left there. Well, my dad comes home from work one day and he notices there's a package sitting there. Mr. Arnold's car was parked in his place. And he was like, oh, I'll just take it up to Arnold and leave it at his door. So that's what my dad did. And he didn't bother to knock. He thought maybe he's napping or, whatever, right? Well, then about 2 more days go by. And then there's another package from Mr. Arnold. And my dad realizes, has he been going to work? See, my dad worked too, and they worked about very similar hours. So, my dad didn't keep tabs on the guy. But then he realized, well, I brought up one package. He goes, maybe he's sick. I should check on him. So he grabs the second package and he goes up there. And he sees the previous package is right where he had left it. So he knew Mr. Arnold had never even opened the door to his apartment in 2 days. Okay, it's been like 2 days, maybe even 3. I can't really remember. And so my dad, concerned, knocks on the door. And he's like, Arnold, it's me, Bob. Your landlord, are you okay? There's no answer. So he figures, okay, I'm going to let this slide. I'll check on him again tomorrow. And if they're both here, I'm going to let myself in with the pass key. So he goes downstairs. He's telling my mom. And I'm away. I live in Texas at this point. I'm married. And I remember the phone call from my mom telling me this, that what had just happened. And I'm like, Mom, you guys need to call the police. There's something really wrong. I just intuitively knew. And my gut told me that Mr. Arnold was either too sick to come to the door, or worse, he was dead. And I tell this to my mom. And my mom's like, no, he's got to be okay up there. I'm like, Mom, you need to call the cops. You need to call them, hang up, and call them right now. So we hang up. My parents did not call the cops. Instead, my mom insisted that Dad go up there and check on Mr. Arnold and use the key to let him in. And it was understood. It's a private family home. Whenever anyone rented out an apartment upstairs, and it stated it clearly in their lease, should we ever suspect you're in trouble, anything gone wrong in the apartment, we will use our main key and let ourselves in to check. And everybody was good with that, including Mr. Arnold. So that's what happened. My dad goes up there, lets himself in, and he is accosted by an extremely horrible smell. The apartment was a straight shot through of 3 rooms. You could see from one end of the apartment down to the other end. And in the kitchen, in the middle, on the floor, was Mr. Arnold. He had been cooking at his stove. Luckily, he had turned off the burner. He had been scrambling some eggs. He was laying there dead on the floor, for at least 3 days, and he was butt naked. Of course, it was extremely shocking. So then my parents called the police, and all manner of people came, and the medical examiner came, and you know, they determined it was natural cause of death. He had had a heart attack while cooking, is what happened. And lucky for us, it didn't start a fire. They surmised as he went down, he hit the handle, the knob on the burner, and managed to turn it off as he fell. You know, my parents were extremely lucky because they could have lost their home. They figured out the day he had had his heart attack, they were out. They weren't home at the time. So then his twin brother shows up, a couple of other family members that my parents had never even met, because these people never even bothered to come to check on him. And as far as I knew, his twin only visited him that one time when I was a little kid. So they come and they speak with my parents. They go up there and they start clearing out his stuff. Now, before Mr. Arnold died, like a couple of years before, he told my dad, should I die up here, you go in that apartment and you check all my books. Thumb through all the books. And you can have what's there. And Dad just thought it was really weird. He just told me, yeah, okay, whatever. Well, my dad was in so much shock and everything that he didn't remember that, you know? And then he goes up there to check on the family members, see if they need any help, right? And he sees this woman, and she's seated on the couch, and she's thumbing through this book, right? And she immediately slams it shut and shoos my dad, almost pushing him out the door, saying, no, we don't need any more help, thank you, we're all set here. Clearly behaving as though she did not want him to see what was in those books. They were filled with cash. Dad saw a real quick flash of green in the pages. Mr. Arnold did not put his money in the bank. He put it in his book collection. So there was all this cash sitting up in his apartment, and he always paid his rent in cash. So they cleared out all the books, took all the cash, what few things he had, and left. And my parents, of course, had to have professional cleaners come to work over that kitchen floor because poor Mr. Arnold had literally begun to decompose on the floor. So all this happens. And then about a good 6 months later, Mom's home, alone in the home. Now remember, I'm currently living in Texas, where I am now. My dad was out somewhere. He was fully retired by then, and I don't know where he was, but he wasn't home. And Mom said all of a sudden she could hear footsteps upstairs. And they were loud. They did not sound like the way Mr. Arnold walked in life. He was, like I said, very quiet. You could hardly ever hear him move around up there. But she heard loud clomping footsteps, and she said it sounded angry. So she freaked out. She thought someone broke in. She called the cops immediately because, you know, here she is, an elderly woman. She's home alone. She's hearing strange footsteps upstairs in an apartment that's been vacant because they just couldn't bring themselves to rent it out again. My mom had just finished fixing it up and everything, getting it ready for a new tenant, but they had yet to advertise it for rent. So it was still vacant, had been vacant since Mr. Arnold passed away up there. Well, the cops come and they go up there and they give it the all clear. And you tell her, I don't know what you're hearing up here, but there's no one up there, there's no sign, no one ever broke in, there's nothing wrong with the lock or anything. And she was like, oh, okay, good, that's a relief, you know. And then she starts wondering, how the hell am I hearing footsteps up there? So then my dad comes home from wherever he's at, after all the excitement's done with, and she's telling my dad, right away my dad says, it's Arnold. And my mom's like, come on, Bob, give me a break, you know. Right away, you gotta think it's a ghost right away, you know, because my dad was Mexican. He was from a small town in Michoacan, Mexico. Anyway, my dad immediately jumps to the conclusion, the house is haunted by Mr. Arnold now, because Mr. Arnold died in that apartment. He grew up very superstitious. Everyone around him was very Catholic, and his grandfather had an extremely strange run-in with the demonic. And if you want to catch that story, it's here. But again, watch it after this one. So, and my dad had his own strange run-ins also, and that story is also here or linked below. I think I'm limited to how many cards I can put in a video, so that third card, everything will be linked below in the description. Just check it out. It's a good one. All true. My dad's convinced the house is now haunted. And my mom's like, no, it's just some weird noises. The house settling, it was like around 90 years old by then. So then my mom puts an ad out to rent that apartment. The day the ad goes out, she and Dad are in the living room, they're watching TV, and all of a sudden they hear, coming from the kitchen where Arnold died, they hear, it's not on a door, it's not on a wall, it's on the floor. My dad takes one look at my mom and says, it's Arnold! And my mom's like, oh my God, Bob, I think you're right. And so now they don't know what to do, right? Well, my dad, he's got local spiritual connections, let's just say. So he calls one of these people to come in and do a cleansing of that apartment. And this woman that he has do the job for him tells my dad after she's done, she says, he's not leaving. He's pissed off because you didn't get the money. And my dad's like, excuse me? And the woman tells him again, he's angry. You didn't take the money. All that money he had in his books was meant for you and your wife and your daughter. And you didn't take it. His family has it. My dad flipped out. They had never told anyone about the money in the books. And Dad had never told anyone except for my mom that Arnold had told him a couple years before he died, when I go, check my books because that's meant for you. And for the rest of his life, which was filled with a lot of hardship, my dad would say to me, why didn't I listen? Why did I ever look in his books? Anger can hold the spirit here. Anger and just the feeling of being at home. Arnold was a total homebody. That man did not have a social life outside of work. And he evidently loved his little home so much, he just stayed. So the case of Arnold, it's a combination of that feeling of just being at home and not wanting to be anywhere else. And also anger because someone didn't listen, my dad. And also probably resentment against his own family who swooped in and took everything that Arnold never intended for them to have. So that is a prime example from not directly my own life, but the lives of my parents as to how a quiet individual became a ghost. And as far as we know, Mr. Arnold is still in that apartment, because when my parents put the home up for sale years later, after my daughter had been born here in Texas, the people who bought the house, the first buyers, were there for just over a year before they put the house up for sale again. Second set of buyers that came in were there for a little over 2 years. Then a third set of buyers came in. They were also there for just about a year. And then finally, the fifth buyer to buy the house has stayed. And as far as I know, they're there today. And I know this because I remain in contact with my friends who lived directly across the street from me growing up. And their mother still lives in that house across the street from my house. So we always assumed it was a quick turnaround because of Mr. Arnold. So this is a prime example of how one individual, quiet, set in his ways, who upon his death chose to remain behind in his own apartment and never leave, because that's where he felt the most comfortable and the happiest. Here's to your health and your happiness. Thank you for stopping by. I ask that you please like, subscribe, drop a comment, and I'll see you all next time on True Tales of the Paranormal with me, Nefer Kefri, your hostess with the ghostess, wishing you a blessed day ahead. And he had his own run-ins. Oh, butterfly. Oh no, it's a mom. It's. I'm so excited. It's a cardinal. I think it's my friend Rufus. Rufus, pretty, pretty, pretty. Rufus. He is the only cardinal who says as his call, Birdie, Birdie, Birdie. Because I used to always call him, say that to him. And he was born in one of our trees in the front yard here. But he's not answering. I think this is one of his sons. Because he's been here about 10 years now, Rufus, my buddy. So he has a set of chicks every year. So this has got to be, yeah, that's a regular cardinal call. That's not Rufus. It's one of his children. That's nice. He came to say hi. Anyway, back to the story.